The phone buzzed against Thomas Gutierrez's palm at 2:37 in the morning, the blue glow illuminating his face in the darkness of his bedroom. Another random text from Alexander Kim, his best friend since college. This one was a picture of a half-eaten sandwich with the caption, "Thought you should know I'm having a midnight snack." Thomas stared at the screen, his heart doing that familiar flutter that had become as constant as breathing over the past few months. Alexander had been texting him these random, seemingly meaningless messages for weeks now, and Thomas was starting to wonder if there was something more behind them than just friendly banter. He typed back quickly, "You're insane, go to sleep." But even as he sent it, he was smiling. Every notification from Alexander felt like a small gift, a reminder that he was on his friend's mind even during the most mundane moments. Thomas had been harboring feelings for Alexander for 2 years and 4 months now. Not that he was counting or anything. He had watched his straight best friend cycle through relationships with women, offering advice and support while his own heart quietly broke a little more each time. But lately something had shifted. The texts had started innocuously enough, random observations about the weather or pictures of his coffee, but they had evolved into something that felt more intentional. Alexander would send him photos of sunsets with messages like, "Reminded me of that time we watched the sunrise after staying up all night talking." Or he would text random questions at odd hours like, "Do you think it's possible to love someone and not realize it for years?" Thomas rolled over in bed, clutching his phone closer to his chest. "Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." The story of how they got to this moment, this strange dance of almost confessions and loaded silences, had been building for months. But to understand the weight of that midnight sandwich text, Thomas had to go back to the beginning, to the moment when everything started to change. 3 months earlier, Alexander had shown up at Thomas's apartment at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, soaking wet from the rain and looking more lost than Thomas had ever seen him. His latest relationship had just ended, another in a long string of connections that never seemed to stick. Alexander had stood in the doorway, water dripping from his dark hair, and said, "I think there's something wrong with me, Thomas. I can't seem to make anything work." Thomas had pulled him inside, wrapped him in a towel, and made him tea while Alexander sat on the couch and talked about how empty he felt, how every relationship felt like he was playing a role that didn't quite fit. "I keep trying to be the boyfriend they want," Alexander had said, his voice small and confused, "but it never feels real. It's like I'm watching someone else live my life." That night, they had talked until dawn, and Thomas had felt something shift between them. Alexander had looked at him with a new kind of vulnerability, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. When Alexander had finally fallen asleep on the couch, Thomas had covered him with a blanket and allowed himself to study his friend's peaceful face, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the slight part of his lips as he breathed. The random texts had started the next week. At first, Thomas had dismissed them as Alexander working through his post-breakup emotions, reaching out for a connection in small, safe ways. But as the weeks passed, the messages became more frequent and more personal. Alexander would text him pictures of books he was reading, asking if Thomas had read them. He would send photos of places around the city with messages like, "Walked past this today and thought of you." Thomas found himself analyzing every word, every emoji, every timestamp. When Alexander sent him a picture of his morning coffee at 7:15 on a Saturday with the message, "Wish you were here to share this," Thomas had stared at his phone for a full 5 minutes, wondering what it meant. Was Alexander just being friendly, or was there something deeper happening? The turning point had come 2 weeks ago during one of their regular movie nights. They had been sitting on Thomas's couch, ostensibly watching some action movie that neither of them was really paying attention to. Alexander had been unusually quiet, picking at the label on his beer bottle and stealing glances at Thomas when he thought he wasn't looking. Halfway through the movie, Alexander had turned to him and said, "Thomas, can I ask you something weird?" When Thomas nodded, Alexander had taken a deep breath and said, "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss someone you weren't supposed to kiss?" The question had hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Thomas had felt his heart stop, then start again at double speed. He had managed to say, "What do you mean?" even though he was pretty sure he knew exactly what Alexander meant. Alexander had looked away, his cheeks flushing slightly. I don't know, he had said, just hypothetically. Like, what if you realized you had feelings for someone you never thought you could have feelings for? Someone who was, I don't know, off limits somehow. Thomas had wanted to reach across the space between them and take Alexander's hand, to tell him that nothing was off limits if they both wanted it. Instead, he had said, I think feelings don't really follow rules. They just are what they are. Alexander had nodded slowly, then turned back to the movie, but Thomas had caught him looking again several times throughout the night. When Alexander left that evening, he had hugged Thomas goodbye, holding on just a little longer than usual, and Thomas had felt something electric pass between them. The texts had intensified after that night. Alexander started sending him good morning messages, pictures of his lunch, random thoughts throughout the day. Thomas began to feel like he was living in Alexander's pocket, privy to every small moment of his daily life. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Last week, Alexander had sent him a text at midnight that simply said, can't sleep, thinking about things. When Thomas had responded asking what kind of things, Alexander had written back, the kind of things that change everything once you admit them to yourself. Thomas had stared at that message for 20 minutes before responding. Sometimes change is good, even when it's scary. Alexander's reply had come immediately. What if the person you are thinking about doesn't feel the same way? Thomas had typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, you might be surprised. People are often thinking the same things you are. They're just too afraid to say it first. The conversation had ended there, but Thomas had lain awake for hours wondering if they were talking about the same person, the same feelings, the same impossible possibility that had been growing between them for months. Now, lying in bed with Alexander's latest random text glowing on his screen, Thomas felt like they were circling around something huge, something that could either destroy their friendship or transform it into something beautiful. The sandwich picture felt like another breadcrumb in a trail that Alexander was leaving for him. Another small way of saying, I'm thinking about you. I want to share my life with you, even the mundane parts. Thomas typed back, what kind of sandwich? And immediately felt foolish. But Alexander's response came quickly. Turkey and Swiss, but that's not really why I texted you. Thomas's heart skipped. He wrote back, why did you text me? The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before Alexander's message came through because I wanted to talk to you. I always want to talk to you. Is that weird? No, Thomas typed back, his hands trembling slightly. It's not weird at all. Can I call you? Alexander texted. Thomas's phone rang before he could respond. He answered on the first ring, his voice barely above a whisper. Hello, hey, Alexander said, and Thomas could hear something different in his voice, something vulnerable and uncertain. I know it's late. It's okay, Thomas said. I wasn't really sleeping anyway. There was a pause, and then Alexander said, Thomas, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it. Thomas sat up in bed, his heart pounding. Okay, he said. I'm listening. I think Alexander began, then stopped. God, this is harder than I thought it would be. I think I might not be as straight as I thought I was. The words hung in the air between them, transmitted through radio waves and fiber optic cables, but feeling as immediate and intimate as if Alexander were sitting right next to him. Thomas closed his eyes, hardly daring to breathe. What makes you think that? Thomas asked gently. You, Alexander said simply, you make me think that. Thomas felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Me, he repeated. I can't stop thinking about you, Alexander said, the words coming out in a rush now. I know that sounds crazy, and I know we're friends, but I can't get you out of my head. I think about texting you all day, and when I'm not with you, I feel like something's missing. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Not really, and I don't know what to do with it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what he was hearing. Alexander, he said finally. I know it's weird, Alexander said quickly. I know you probably don't feel the same way, and I don't want to ruin our friendship. But I had to tell you, I've been going crazy keeping it to myself. Alexander, Thomas said again, more firmly this time. Stop talking for a second. Alexander fell silent. I've been in love with you for 2 years and 4 months, Thomas said, the words feeling strange and wonderful in his mouth. Since that night, we stayed up until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, and you fell asleep on my shoulder. and I realized I never wanted you to move. There was complete silence on the other end of the line. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. You have, Alexander said finally, his voice small and wondering. I have, Thomas confirmed. I've been watching you date other people and giving you advice about relationships while dying a little inside every time, because I thought you were straight and I thought I never had a chance. Oh my God, Alexander said. Oh my God, Thomas. All this time. All this time, Thomas agreed. Can I come over? Alexander asked. Right now, I need to see you. Thomas looked at the clock. It was almost 3 in the morning. Yes, he said. Please come over. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Alexander said and hung up. Thomas got out of bed and paced around his apartment, too wired to sit still. He ran his hands through his hair, changed his shirt twice, then changed back to the original one. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. When the knock came at his door, Thomas opened it to find Alexander standing in the hallway, still in his pajamas with a jacket thrown over them. His hair was messy, and his eyes were bright with something that looked like excitement and terror mixed together. Hi, Alexander said. Hi, Thomas said back. They stood there looking at each other for a moment, and Thomas felt like he was seeing Alexander clearly for the first time, without the filter of assumed heterosexuality and impossible longing. Alexander was looking at him the same way, his gaze intense and searching. Can I come in? Alexander asked. Thomas stepped aside and Alexander walked into the apartment. They moved to the living room, but neither of them sat down. Instead, they stood facing each other in the middle of the room, the air between them charged with possibility. I can't believe you've felt this way for 2 years, Alexander said. I feel like such an idiot. Why, Thomas asked. Because I've been trying so hard to make things work with other people when what I really wanted was right here, Alexander said. I kept comparing everyone to you, and they all came up short, and I couldn't figure out why. Thomas took a step closer. And now you know why. Now I know why. Alexander agreed. He reached out tentatively and touched Thomas's hand. Is this okay? Thomas intertwined their fingers. More than okay. Alexander looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Thomas's face. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too, Thomas said, but good scared or bad scared? Good scared, Alexander said. Definitely good scared. They moved closer together, and Thomas could smell Alexander's familiar scent, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Alexander reached up with his free hand and touched Thomas's cheek. I've never done this before, Alexander said quietly. With a guy, I mean. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Thomas said. We can take this as slow as you want. Alexander smiled, and it was like the sun coming up. I've been ready for this for months, he said. I just didn't know what this was. Thomas cupped Alexander's face in his hands, marveling at the softness of his skin, the way Alexander leaned into the touch. Can I kiss you? He asked. Please, Alexander whispered. Thomas leaned in slowly, giving Alexander time to change his mind, but Alexander met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, tentative and questioning, then with growing certainty as they realized how right it felt. Alexander's arms came up around Thomas's neck, pulling him closer, and Thomas felt like every random text, every loaded glance, every moment of longing had led to this. They kissed until they were both breathing hard, then pulled apart just enough to rest their foreheads together. Wow, Alexander said. Yeah, Thomas agreed. Wow. They stood there holding each other, and Thomas felt like he was in a dream. After 2 years of wanting this, of thinking it was impossible, Alexander was here in his arms, warm and real, and wanting him back. What happens now? Alexander asked. I don't know, Thomas said honestly. What do you want to happen? Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking. I want to figure this out with you, he said finally. I want to try this, whatever this is, and see where it goes. Even though it's going to be complicated, Thomas said. Even though it's going to be complicated, Alexander confirmed. Even though I'm probably going to be terrible at this at first, and even though I don't know what I'm doing. You won't be terrible at this, Thomas said, and I'll help you figure it out. Alexander smiled and kissed him again, shorter this time, but no less sweet. I love that you've been sending me random texts, Thomas said when they broke apart. Alexander laughed. Those weren't random, he said. I was trying to find excuses to talk to you. I wanted to share everything with you. Even stupid stuff like what I was eating for lunch. I know, Thomas said. I could tell. I was going crazy trying to figure out what they meant. They meant I was falling for you, and I didn't know how to say it, Alexander said. So I said it with pictures of sandwiches and sunsets instead. Thomas pulled him closer. I got the message, he said. They moved to the couch, settling into each other's arms like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. Alexander curled against Thomas's side, his head on Thomas's shoulder, and Thomas marveled at how perfectly they fit together. Are you going to regret this in the morning? Thomas asked quietly. Alexander lifted his head to look at him. Are you crazy? He said. This is the best thing that's happened to me in years, maybe ever. Thomas ran his fingers through Alexander's hair. I just want to make sure you're sure, he said. I don't want you to feel like I pushed you into anything, Thomas, Alexander said seriously. You didn't push me into anything. If anything, you've been incredibly patient while I figured myself out. I'm the one who's been sending you random texts at all hours because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Thomas smiled. I love those texts. Good, Alexander said, settling back against Thomas's shoulder, because you're going to get a lot more of them. They talked until the sun came up, sharing stories about when they first realized their feelings, laughing about all the moments of almost confessions and missed signals. Alexander told Thomas about the night he had shown up in the rain, how he'd gone home and couldn't stop thinking about the way Thomas had taken care of him, the way Thomas always took care of him. I think I knew then, Alexander said, but I was too scared to admit it to myself. Thomas told Alexander about the movie night when Alexander had asked about kissing someone you weren't supposed to kiss, how Thomas had wanted to lean over and show him exactly what that would be like. I was talking about you, Alexander said. I was trying to work up the courage to tell you how I felt. I know, Thomas said. I hoped you were, but I didn't want to assume. As the morning light filtered through the windows, they found themselves lying on the couch together. Alexander's head on Thomas's chest, their legs tangled together. Thomas traced patterns on Alexander's back, still hardly believing this was real. What are you thinking about? Alexander asked sleepily. How this is going to change everything, Thomas said, in the best possible way. Alexander lifted his head to look at him. Are you okay with everything changing? Thomas smiled and kissed Alexander's forehead. I've been waiting for everything to change for 2 years, he said. I'm more than okay with it. 3 weeks later, Thomas woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Alexander humming in the kitchen. They had fallen into a natural rhythm, with Alexander spending most nights at Thomas's apartment, their lives intertwining in ways that felt both new and inevitable. Alexander had broken up with his latest girlfriend the day after their first kiss, a conversation that had been difficult but necessary. She had taken it better than expected, admitting that she had sensed his heart wasn't really in their relationship. Alexander had been honest with her about discovering feelings for someone else, though he hadn't specified that the someone else was male. That conversation, they had decided, could wait until Alexander was more comfortable with his new understanding of himself. Thomas padded into the kitchen to find Alexander making breakfast, wearing one of Thomas's t-shirts and a pair of boxers, his hair sticking up at odd angles. He looked up when Thomas entered, his face breaking into the smile that still made Thomas's heart skip. Good morning, beautiful, Alexander said, crossing the kitchen to kiss Thomas hello. Thomas wrapped his arms around Alexander's waist, pulling him close. Good morning yourself, he said against Alexander's lips. I made coffee, Alexander said, and I was thinking about making pancakes, but then I remembered you have that meeting this morning, so I made toast instead. Thomas felt a surge of affection for this man who remembered his schedule, who made him coffee without being asked, who looked perfect in his kitchen wearing his clothes. You didn't have to make anything, he said. I wanted to, Alexander said simply. I like taking care of you. They ate breakfast together at Thomas's small kitchen table, their knees touching under the surface, reading news on their phones and sharing interesting articles. It was domestic and comfortable in a way that Thomas had dreamed about, but never quite believed would happen. I have to work late tonight, Alexander said as they finished eating. But I was thinking, maybe we could do something this weekend, like go somewhere together. Thomas looked up from his phone. What did you have in mind? I don't know, Alexander said, suddenly looking shy. Maybe we could drive up the coast, find a bed and breakfast somewhere. I know we haven't really talked about, going public with this yet, but I thought maybe somewhere where no one knows us. Thomas reached across the table and took Alexander's hand. That sounds perfect, he said. I'd love to go away with you. Alexander's smile was radiant. Really, really, Thomas confirmed. I want to be able to hold your hand in public and kiss you whenever I want to. Alexander's cheeks flushed slightly, and Thomas was struck again by how beautiful he was. How lucky Thomas was to be here with him like this. I love when you blush, Thomas said. I'm not blushing, Alexander protested, which only made him blush harder. Thomas stood up and walked around the table, pulling Alexander to his feet and into his arms. You're definitely blushing, he said, kissing Alexander's warm cheeks. Alexander melted into the embrace, his arms coming up around Thomas's neck. I can't help it, he said. You still make me nervous sometimes. Good nervous or bad nervous? Thomas asked, echoing the conversation they'd had that first night. The best kind of nervous, Alexander said, and kissed him. They stood in the kitchen, holding each other, and Thomas thought about how much had changed in just 3 weeks. Alexander had thrown himself into this new relationship with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything else in his life, asking questions, reading articles about sexuality and coming out, talking through his feelings with the same analytical approach he used for work problems. There had been moments of uncertainty, times when Alexander would get quiet and Thomas could see him working through some internal conflict. But they had talked through each one, with Alexander gradually becoming more comfortable with his new understanding of himself, more confident in what he wanted. The random texts had continued, but now they carried a different weight. Instead of desperate attempts at connection, they were love letters in miniature, small ways of saying, I'm thinking about you throughout the day. Thomas's phone would buzz with pictures of Alexander's lunch accompanied by messages like, wish you were here to steal my fries, or photos of interesting architecture with notes like, this reminded me of that thing you said about urban design. Thomas had started sending his own random texts in return, pictures of his coffee with messages like, thinking about you, or photos of books he thought Alexander would like. It had become their own private language, a way of staying connected even when they were apart. I should probably get ready for work, Alexander said reluctantly, but he made no move to step out of Thomas's arms. Probably, Thomas agreed, also not moving. They stood there for another few minutes, just holding each other in the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, before Alexander finally pulled away with a sigh. Tonight, he said, kissing Thomas once more before heading toward the bedroom to get dressed. Tonight, Thomas agreed, watching him go and marveling at the casual intimacy of it, the way Alexander moved through Thomas's space like it was his own, because in many ways it was. That evening, Thomas was making dinner when his phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Instead of a random picture, it was a message that made his heart race. I told my sister about us today. Thomas immediately called him. How did that go? He asked when Alexander picked up. Better than I expected, Alexander said, and Thomas could hear the relief in his voice. She said she always wondered if I was gay, and that she likes you, so she's happy for us. Thomas felt a wave of warmth. She likes me. She's always liked you, Alexander said. She said, and I quote, it's about time you figured out what everyone else could see from a mile away. Thomas laughed. What does that mean? Apparently, the way I talk about you made it pretty obvious to everyone except me, Alexander said. She said she was wondering when I was going to stop being an idiot and realize I was in love with my best friend. You told her you love me, Thomas said, his heart doing that familiar flutter. There was a pause. Is that okay, Alexander asked. I mean, I do love you. I've been wanting to say it for weeks, but I wasn't sure if it was too soon. Thomas sat down heavily on his couch, overwhelmed by the casualness of it, the way Alexander could just say those words like they were the most natural thing in the world. Thomas, Alexander said when he didn't respond immediately. Are you there? I'm here, Thomas said, and I love you too. I've loved you for so long that I can't remember what it felt like not to love you. Alexander was quiet for a moment. I wish I could be there right now, he said finally. How much longer do you have to work? Another hour, maybe 2, Alexander said. But then I'm coming straight home. Home, Thomas repeated, liking the way it sounded. Your place feels more like home than my own apartment does, Alexander said. Is it weird that I want to spend every night with you? It's not weird, Thomas said. I want that too. When Alexander arrived 2 hours later, he found Thomas waiting for him with dinner and a bottle of wine. They ate by candlelight, talking about their days, about Alexander's conversation with his sister, about their plans for the weekend getaway. After dinner, they curled up on the couch together, Alexander's head in Thomas's lap, while Thomas ran his fingers through his hair. They were watching some mindless television show, but Thomas wasn't really paying attention. He was too focused on the weight of Alexander's body against his, the soft sounds Alexander made when Thomas's fingers found a particularly good spot on his scalp. "Thomas," Alexander said quietly. Thank you." "For what?" "For being patient with me," Alexander said. "For waiting for me to figure myself out. For not giving up on me when I was too scared to admit what I was feeling." Thomas looked down at Alexander's face, so peaceful and content in his lap. "I would have waited forever," he said. Alexander turned to look up at him. "I'm glad you didn't have to." Thomas leaned down and kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting the wine on Alexander's lips. When they broke apart, Alexander sat up and moved closer, settling into Thomas's arms. "I have something to tell you," Alexander said. Thomas felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to come out to my parents," Alexander said. "I want them to know about us." Thomas's heart swelled with pride and love. "Are you sure?" he asked. "There's no rush." "I'm sure," Alexander said. "I don't want to hide this anymore. I don't want to hide you anymore. You're too important to me to keep secret." Thomas kissed the top of Alexander's head. "I'll be there with you if you want," he said. "Whatever you need." "I was hoping you'd say that," Alexander said, "because I can't imagine doing this without you." They talked about it for another hour, planning what Alexander would say, discussing possible reactions, preparing for various scenarios. Thomas felt honored to be included in this decision, to be trusted with something so important and personal. Later, as they lay in bed together, Alexander's head on Thomas's chest and their legs intertwined, Thomas thought about how much had changed since that first random text about a midnight sandwich. What had started as desperate attempts at connection had evolved into something deeper, something real and lasting. "I love your random texts," Thomas said into the darkness. Alexander lifted his head to look at him, "even the ones about food." "Especially the ones about food," Thomas said. "They were never really about food anyway." "No," Alexander agreed. "They were about wanting to share my life with you, even the boring parts." "There are no boring parts when it comes to you," Thomas said. Alexander smiled and kissed Thomas's chest right over his heart. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Thomas replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The weekend getaway had been everything they had hoped for in Martouint. They had found a small bed and breakfast 2 hours up the coast, a charming Victorian house with a view of the ocean, and a proprietor who had welcomed them warmly without any awkward questions or sideways glances. For 2 days, they had been able to be completely themselves, holding hands as they walked along the beach, kissing whenever they wanted to, talking about their future without having to worry about who might be listening. Alexander had been more relaxed than Thomas had ever seen him, laughing freely and touching Thomas constantly, as if he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to. On their last morning, they had sat on the bed and breakfast wraparound porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the water. Alexander had been quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that came from contentment rather than worry. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas had asked. "How happy I am," Alexander had said simply. "I didn't know I could feel this happy." Thomas had reached for Alexander's hand, intertwining their fingers. "You deserve to be happy," he had said. "So do you," Alexander had replied, "and I want to make you happy for as long as you'll let me." Now back in the city, they were preparing for Alexander to come out to his parents. They had planned it carefully, deciding that Alexander would call them first, then arrange for them to meet Thomas officially as his boyfriend rather than just his friend. Alexander was nervous, pacing around Thomas's living room while Thomas made them both tea. His parents were generally liberal and accepting people, but this would still be a significant revelation, a fundamental shift in how they understood their son. "What if they don't take it well?" Alexander said for the third time in 10 minutes. "Then we'll deal with that together," Thomas said, handing him a mug. "But I think they're going to surprise you. Parents usually just want their children to be happy." Alexander took a sip of tea and sat down next to Thomas on the couch. "I know you're right," he said. I want them to like you. I want them to see what I see in you." Thomas took Alexander's free hand. They will, he said. How could they not? Alexander smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. You always know exactly what to say. I've had a lot of practice talking you down from panic spirals, Thomas said teasingly. Alexander laughed. That's true. You've been doing it for years. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their tea and watching the sun set through Thomas's living room window. Thomas thought about all the evenings they had spent like this over the years, talking and laughing and sharing comfortable silences, and how it had taken them so long to realize what was right in front of them. I'm going to call them now, Alexander said suddenly, setting down his mug with a decisive clink. Are you sure? Thomas asked. If I don't do it now, I'm going to keep putting it off, Alexander said, and I don't want to wait anymore. Thomas squeezed his hand. I'll be right here. Alexander took a deep breath and picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found his parents' number. He looked at Thomas once more, who nodded encouragingly, then pressed call. Hi, Mom, Alexander said when the call connected. Is Dad there too? Can you put me on speaker? I have something important to tell you both. Thomas could hear the concern in his mother's voice as she called for Alexander's father and put the phone on speaker. What's wrong, honey? She asked. Nothing's wrong, Alexander said quickly. Actually, something's very right. I have some news to share with you. Thomas watched Alexander's face as he talked, seeing the moment when his natural confidence kicked in, when he stopped being nervous and started being honest. I'm gay, Alexander said clearly, and I'm in a relationship with someone very important to me. Someone you both know, actually. Thomas. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Thomas saw Alexander's jaw tighten slightly. But then his father's voice came through the speaker, warm and slightly amused. Well, his father said, it's about time you figured that out. What? Alexander said, clearly not the response he had been expecting. Honey, his mother said, we've been wondering for years when you were going to realize you were in love with Thomas. Alexander looked at Thomas with wide eyes, then back at the phone. You knew, we suspected, his father said. The way you talk about him, the way you light up when he's around, it was pretty obvious to everyone except you. And Thomas is a wonderful young man, his mother added. If you had to fall in love with your best friend, you picked a good one. Alexander was quiet for a moment, and Thomas could see him processing this unexpected reaction. So you're okay with this? Alexander asked. Sweetheart, his mother said, we just want you to be happy, and if Thomas makes you happy, then we're thrilled for you both. We are, his father confirmed. When do we get to officially welcome Thomas to the family? Alexander looked at Thomas, his eyes bright with unshed tears of relief. How about next weekend, he said. We could come over for dinner. That sounds perfect, his mother said. Thomas, are you there? Thomas leaned closer to the phone. I'm here, Mrs. Kim. None of that formal stuff, she said. You're family now. Call me Mom. Thomas felt his own eyes well up. Thank you, he said. That means everything to me. After they hung up, Alexander sat staring at his phone for a moment, then looked at Thomas with an expression of amazement. That went better than I ever could have imagined, he said. Thomas pulled him into his arms. I told you they just wanted you to be happy. Alexander buried his face in Thomas's neck. I can't believe they knew, he said, his voice muffled. I can't believe everyone knew except me. Sometimes we're the last ones to see what's right in front of us, Thomas said, stroking Alexander's hair. Alexander pulled back to look at him. Not anymore, he said. I see you now. I see us. Thomas cupped Alexander's face in his hands. And what do you see? I see forever, Alexander said simply. I see coming home to you every day and waking up next to you every morning. I see us growing old together and still sending each other random texts about what we had for lunch. Thomas laughed, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. I see all of that too. Alexander kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against Thomas's. I have a confession, Alexander said. What's that? I've been thinking about asking you to move in together, he said. Officially, I mean. Not just me spending every night here, but actually combining our lives. Thomas's heart skipped. What's stopping you? Nothing, Alexander said. Alexander Kim, will you move in with me? Or will you let me move in with you? I don't care which, I just want us to have a home together. Thomas kissed him again, longer this time. Yes, he said, against Alexander's lips. Yes to all of it. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about whose apartment to keep, how to combine their belongings, what it would mean to officially live together. It felt natural and right, the next logical step in a relationship that had been building for years without either of them realizing it. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text. He reached for it, expecting work email or spam, but found a message from Alexander, who was lying right next to him. The text was a picture of their intertwined hands against the white sheets, with the caption, "Wanted to document this moment, the night we decided to build a life together." Thomas showed Alexander the screen. "You're ridiculous," he said fondly. "You love my ridiculous texts," Alexander said, not even pretending to be sorry. "I do," Thomas said. "I love everything about you, even when I text you pictures of my food, especially when you text me pictures of your food," Thomas said. "Those texts saved us, you know. They were your way of telling me you loved me before you knew how to say it." Alexander turned on his side to face Thomas fully. "They were my way of trying to be close to you when I didn't understand why I needed that closeness so much. And now you understand. Now I understand that I was falling in love with you one random text at a time," Alexander said. "Every picture, every silly message, every excuse to talk to you was me trying to figure out how to tell you that you were the most important person in my world." Thomas pulled him closer, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, how right this felt. "And now I know," he said. "Now you know," Alexander agreed. "And now I can tell you properly, every day for the rest of our lives." 6 months later, Thomas woke up in their shared apartment to the smell of coffee and the sound of Alexander singing in the shower. They had decided to keep Thomas's place, since it was bigger and had better light, and Alexander had moved in gradually over the course of a month, bringing his books and clothes and the small collection of plants he had somehow acquired. The process of combining their lives had been easier than either of them had expected. They had similar tastes in furniture and decoration, and the few conflicts they had encountered had been easily resolved through compromise and communication. Alexander had brought warmth and color to Thomas's previously sparse apartment, while Thomas had provided the organizational systems that kept Alexander's creative chaos from taking over completely. Thomas padded to the kitchen, where he found a fresh cup of coffee waiting for him next to a note in Alexander's handwriting that said, "Good morning, beautiful. Have a wonderful day. I love you." It was a small ritual that Alexander had started shortly after moving in, leaving little love notes for Thomas to find throughout their shared space. As Thomas sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed with a text from Alexander, who was still in the shower. The message was a picture of the shampoo bottle with the caption, "We're out of the good stuff. Can you grab some on your way home?" Thomas smiled and typed back, "Of course. Anything else we need?" The response came quickly, "Just you. Home safe tonight." These exchanges had become as natural as breathing, a constant thread of connection that ran through their days. The random texts had evolved from desperate attempts at communication to comfortable expressions of love and partnership. Alexander would send Thomas pictures of interesting things he saw during the day, and Thomas would respond with observations about his own activities, creating a shared narrative of their separate but intertwined lives. Alexander emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, his hair damp and curling slightly. "Good morning," he said, crossing the kitchen to kiss Thomas hello. "Good morning yourself," Thomas said, wrapping his arms around Alexander's waist. "You're up early. I have that presentation today," Alexander said. "I wanted to get to the office early to run through it one more time." "You're going to be brilliant," Thomas said. "You always are." Alexander smiled and kissed him again. "What would I do without you to boost my confidence?" "You'll never have to find out," Thomas said. After Alexander left for work, Thomas got ready for his own day, but found himself thinking about how much their relationship had deepened over the past 6 months. Living together had revealed new dimensions of compatibility, small daily rhythms that reinforced their connection. Alexander was neat but not obsessive, creative but not chaotic, affectionate but not clingy. Thomas had discovered that Alexander sang in the shower, left little drawings on the bathroom mirror when it fogged up, and always made enough coffee for both of them, even when Thomas was running late. For his part, Thomas had learned to appreciate Alexander's spontaneity, his tendency to suggest impromptu adventures or changes of plan. Alexander had taught him to be more flexible, more open to possibility, While Thomas had helped Alexander develop better organizational habits and long-term planning skills, they had settled into a comfortable domesticity that felt both new and familiar, as if they had been living together for years instead of months. Their friends had adapted quickly to seeing them as a couple, with many admitting that they had always suspected there was something more than friendship between them. Alexander's parents had indeed welcomed Thomas into their family with open arms, treating him with the same warmth and affection they had always shown, but now with the added dimension of recognition that he was their son's partner. Thomas's own parents, who lived across the country, had been equally supportive when he had called to tell them about Alexander, expressing happiness that he had found someone who clearly made him so happy. That evening, Thomas arrived home to find Alexander already there, sitting on their couch with his laptop, working on something that had him completely absorbed. Alexander looked up when Thomas entered, his face breaking into the smile that still made Thomas's heart skip after all this time. "How did the presentation go?" Thomas asked, settling next to Alexander on the couch. "Really well," Alexander said, closing his laptop and turning to give Thomas his full attention. "I think we got the account." "That's amazing," Thomas said, leaning over to kiss him. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," Alexander said. "How was your day?" "Good," Thomas said. "Productive." "I missed you, though." "I missed you too," Alexander said. "I kept wanting to text you during the presentation, but I thought that might be unprofessional." Thomas laughed. "Probably wise." Alexander curled against Thomas's side, fitting perfectly into the space under his arm. "I love this," he said. "What?" "This," Alexander said, gesturing around their living room. "Coming home to you, having someone to share good news with, building a life together." Thomas pressed a kiss to the top of Alexander's head. "I love it too." They ordered takeout for dinner and ate it curled up on their couch, sharing stories about their days and making plans for the weekend. It was a perfectly ordinary evening, the kind they had shared hundreds of times now, but Thomas never stopped feeling grateful for the simple pleasure of Alexander's company, the easy intimacy of their shared life. After dinner, they cleaned up together, moving around their kitchen in a practiced dance of domestic partnership. Alexander washed dishes while Thomas dried and put them away, and they talked about everything and nothing, the comfortable chatter of people who knew each other completely. "I got a text from my sister today," Alexander said as they finished up. "She wants to know if we're coming to her wedding." Thomas paused in the middle of drying a plate. "Her wedding. She got engaged last weekend," Alexander said. "I forgot to tell you with all the presentations stress. She wants us to be in the wedding party." Thomas felt a flutter of emotion. "Both of us. Both of us," Alexander confirmed. She said, and I quote, "I can't imagine getting married without my brother and my future brother-in-law there to celebrate with me." "Future brother-in-law," Thomas repeated, his heart doing that familiar skip. Alexander turned to face him fully, suddenly serious. "Thomas," he said. "Yes. I know we haven't talked about marriage yet," Alexander said, "but I want you to know that's where I see this going. I see forever with you." Thomas set down the plate and the dish towel, giving Alexander his complete attention. "I see forever with you too," he said. Alexander stepped closer, taking Thomas's hands in his. "I know it's still early, and I'm not proposing right now, but I want you to know that I'm thinking about it, about us, about making this official, about spending the rest of my life with you." Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes. "I think about it too," he said, "all the time." "Yeah?" Alexander asked, his voice soft and hopeful. "Yeah," Thomas confirmed. "I think about growing old with you, about traveling together, about maybe adopting about all the random texts we'll send each other over the next 50 years. Alexander laughed, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "A dog. A dog," Thomas said. "You've been hinting about it for weeks." "I have not been hinting," Alexander protested. "You sent me 17 pictures of puppies last month," Thomas said. "That's not hinting, that's campaigning." Alexander grinned. "Okay, maybe I've been campaigning a little." Thomas pulled him closer. "I love your campaigns," he said. "I love your random texts and your morning songs and the way you leave me notes. I love the way you've made this place feel like home." Alexander kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," he said against Thomas's lips. "I love you too," Thomas said. "So much that sometimes I can't believe this is real." "It's real," Alexander said. "We're real." They stood in their kitchen holding each other, and Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first desperate midnight text about a sandwich to this moment of quiet domestic bliss, they had traveled a path that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander, who was standing right next to him brushing his teeth. The message was a picture of their bathroom counter with both their toothbrushes side by side, captioned, "I love that we brush our teeth together now." Thomas showed Alexander the screen, shaking his head in amused exasperation. "You're never going to stop with the random texts, are you?" Alexander rinsed his mouth and grinned at Thomas in the mirror. "Never," he said. "I'm going to be sending you pictures of my breakfast when we're 80. Promise?" Thomas asked. "Promise," Alexander said, turning to face him. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life finding new ways to tell you I love you, one random text at a time." Thomas pulled him close, marveling at how far they had come. How much had changed since that first confused midnight message? "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life receiving them," he said. As they settled into bed together, Alexander's head on Thomas's chest and their legs intertwined, Thomas felt a deep sense of contentment wash over him. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet moments of connection, silly texts about mundane things, the simple pleasure of falling asleep next to someone you loved completely. His phone buzzed one more time, and Thomas reached for it to find another message from Alexander, sent from approximately 3 feet away. This one was a picture of them in bed together, Alexander having somehow managed to take a selfie of them both, with the caption, "Good night to the love of my life. Thank you for loving me back." Thomas showed Alexander the screen, then kissed the top of his head. "Thank you for teaching me that love can be as simple as a text about a sandwich," he said. Alexander lifted his head to look at him, his eyes soft with affection. "Thank you for seeing what I was really trying to say," he said. Thomas smiled and pulled him closer. "I'll always see what you're really trying to say," he said, "even when you're saying it with pictures of food. Especially when I'm saying it with pictures of food," Alexander corrected, settling back against Thomas's chest. Thomas closed his eyes, listening to Alexander's breathing as it gradually slowed and deepened. In a few minutes, Alexander would be asleep, and Thomas would lie awake for a little while longer, marveling at the weight of him, the reality of their shared life, the impossible miracle of love found and returned. Tomorrow, Alexander would wake up and make them both coffee, leaving another little note for Thomas to find. He would send Thomas random texts throughout the day, pictures and observations and silly messages that were really just different ways of saying, "I love you." And Thomas would respond with his own messages, his own pictures, his own ways of saying, "I love you" back. It was a simple rhythm, this life they had built together, but it was theirs. From desperate midnight messages to comfortable domestic routine, they had found their way to each other through a trail of random texts and patient love. Thomas's last thought before sleep was of gratitude for Alexander's courage in reaching out, for his own patience in waiting, for the strange and wonderful way that love could announce itself through something as simple as a picture of a half-eaten sandwich sent at 2:37 in the morning. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that caught you completely off guard, that grew from friendship into something deeper, that declared themselves not with grand gestures, but with the quiet persistence of daily affection. In the morning, Thomas would wake up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Alexander humming in the shower, and his phone would buzz with another random text, another small declaration of love disguised as an observation about breakfast or the weather or whatever had caught Alexander's attention. And Thomas would smile and text back, continuing the conversation that had started with a sandwich and would continue for the rest of their lives, one random message at a time. They were both exactly where they needed to be, Thomas thought as sleep finally claimed him, in love, at home, and still sending each other pictures of their food, because some habits were too perfect to break.